In a previous video, I talked about ROM and BIOS, and you may have been a little confused. So hopefully in this video where I talk about firmware, you'll get a better understanding about ROM and BIOS as well. What is firmware? Well, firmware is a series of computer instructions that tells the computer how to interact with a particular device. Your keyboard has firmware. So what happens is this little program tells your computer when you hit a keystroke what to do on the motherboard. The same thing is true of, say, your disk drive, your DVD burner. This program, this firmware, tells the computer how quickly to send information from the RAM to the DVD burner so that it can actually be burned. It also tells your motherboard how fast your DVD burner is actually burning, etc., etc. Same way with the mouse. Every time your mouse moves, there's a program that comes from the mouse to your motherboard, telling the computer how fast the mouse is moving, where to move the mouse pointer on your screen, so on and so forth. It's the same thing with your monitor. The firmware for the monitor would tell the computer what colors to display on the monitor as you place in instructions on the computer. And yes, you can actually program your monitor to display certain colors. You'd have to either know VB script, JavaScript, you'd have to play with the Flash, so on and so forth, but we won't get into those big time details at this point. It's just important to know that even with your USB devices, like your digital cameras and your MP3 players and whatever, there's firmware on each one of these devices. Your digital camera has firmware. Your USB MP3 device has firmware. And this firmware tells the computer how to send information from the hard drive to the MP3 player. That kind of thing. So that's what firmware does. It used to be done with the BIOS, but like I told you in the BIOS video, components like your MP3 players and your digital cameras and your DVD burners and your keyboards and your mice and so forth like that, they're being upgraded so fast that you would have to change your BIOS 50 million times just to accommodate these things. Well, now they have this wonderful plug and play. You don't have to do that. The firmware does that for you. And so they have really switched from a BIOS to firmware. Now I know you see BIOS when you first boot up your computer, but that's only for the motherboard itself. The BIOS for your keyboard, your mouse, your disk drives, your hard drive, etc., etc., that's actually found on those devices. There's firmware that's burned onto the keyboard, firmware that's burned on the mouse, firmware that's burned on the digital camera, firmware that's burned on every USB device that you have. There's firmware burned on the video display. Graphics cards have their own BIOS, so on and so forth. And this BIOS is called firmware. That's what it's called. Hopefully that cleared up all the confusion. You may still be confused, and if you are, send me a video, send me a comment, let me know, and I'll try to clarify it further for you. I will discuss more computer terms in a future video, so stay tuned.